the mountains there is the snowman, apparently something of a giant and cannibal. He cannot be seen, but the creak of his snowshoes is sometimes heard. I'm going up to the mountains to see if I can find this snowman. As ever, our search for the monster is defined by a finite set of postulates. We have the part where we suspend disbelief and look for the monster as a real monster. And we have the physical explanation, where we try to find things in the real environment that could have inspired this myth, a real-life basis for the story. The one source we have for this monster is a 1905 study on the remaining members of the Maidu tribe in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. It documented some of their folk tales and folkways, but only after they had been persecuted and excluded from much of their land during the gold rush and subsequent settlement. For suspending disbelief, our postulate is the snowman is a real, invisible ice giant who eats humans. Our questions about this postulate are, does the environment lend itself to the kind of behavior described in the story? It's only active in the winter, so can the environment support this? Do humans get eaten every winter here? And if not, are there alternate sources of nutrition for the monster? Is there actual physical evidence for this creature? To support our postulate that the snowman exists, the answers to these questions have to be yes, yes, and yes. For the physical side of our method, our postulate is there is a physical explanation for this mythical creature. There is something out there in the woods that can help us understand why people thought there was a giant invisible cannibal stalking the winter forest. So for our first postulate, where we suspend disbelief and look for a real monster, we have to ask, what kind of animal do we have on our hands? It is active in the snowy winter, but apparently dormant when there's not snow on the ground. In other words, it's the exact opposite of a bear. Bears are active in the warm months and go into torpor in the winter, although no one's told this Ursus americanus. So if this thing is dormant in the warm months, where does it sleep? Perhaps it doesn't change its behavior seasonally like bears. Perhaps it's a migrator. It comes down from the north when the snows begin, and come winter's end it moves back up, to the land of always winter. Since the continuous chain of high mountains connects the snowman's range in the Sierra Nevadas with the land of always winter, I'll say the environment does lend itself to the creature's purported behavior. I can't find any records of unsolved disappearances here, but perhaps the snowman is staying fed on other mammals. What kind of mammals, human-sized or larger, inhabit the winter forest? I already ran into a black bear. Now, to answer this question of alternate prey, and the next question of whether there's physical evidence for the snowman, let's look down. I find what I think are deer prints and rabbit prints. I find a few at which I can't hazard a guess, but I don't find any giant footprints. I checked all of these except one. Physical evidence. I found none. It could be out there, but I didn't find it this winter. For the second half of our method, the physical explanation, I can't think of anything in nature that could be mistaken for a giant invisible snow cannibal whose creaking snowshoes give him away. So there's nothing for it but to strap on my own snowshoes and head out there in the snow to see what I can find. I stop by lakes. I examine the ice. I find a partially frozen waterfall. But I don't find a snow giant. Yet. Suddenly, I hear a great groaning or creaking noise coming from far off. It starts to sound like an avalanche, and it sounds like it's coming toward me. It almost sounds like it's coming from across the lake. Then it stops, just short of me, on the edge of the lake. I realize it must have been the groaning and creaking of the ice. I've never heard a sound like it before. I grew up in San Diego, where it rained once when I was 5. If you grew up in a winter clime, you might laugh at how amazed I was at this normal sound of winter. But it was very alien. It sounded artificial. Like the creaking of giant snowshoes. I quickly pulled out my camera and tried to record some of the noises. They came and went erratically. I ended up capturing some of the stranger sounds. Have a listen. To conclude, our postulate that the monster exists was not supported. Though the mountains could be a seasonal migration route for the snowman, And there are large mammals to eat in winter. I found no physical evidence of the creature itself. This doesn't mean there isn't physical evidence out there, though. In the words of many a research paper, further study needed. Our second postulate, that there is a naturalistic explanation for the creature, is supported. I went out into the woods and was startled by a giant invisible creaking. This could easily have fed into the legend of the snowman. But it doesn't mean that this is what happened. Our postulate was that there was a physical explanation, which there is. But it doesn't mean it's the physical explanation. It works, it can explain the story, but we don't know that it actually led to the myth of the snowman. It's just a possible answer. So what's the point of all this? We asked a question, and we actually found a potential answer. We did this by laying out a set of postulates and defining what the conditions would have to be for those statements to be true. And we went to the place. We put ourselves into the environment which this story came from. And so we put ourselves into a position to run into something that might have been the source for this story. A heartfelt, icy thank you to everyone with whom I talked and off whom I bounced ideas for this. Thank you to Mom and Dad for believing in me, and for helping with the board. Thank you to Shuggy and John for having me to dinner when I was up in the mountains, and for consulting on the tracks in the snow. And thank you to my patrons on patreon.com/A Monstrous Method, who get 2 special members-only extra videos a month. Check it out, and see you next time.